Ms. Shepherd. Thank you, Mr. Dowd. A pleasure to serve under your chairship, and thank you for squeezing me into the debate. I think all of us will have been appalled at the loss of life in the conflict in Gaza and in Israel last month, but particularly the loss of life, and particularly the loss of life of non-combatants and many children who we saw on our television screens. But the real tragedy is not that. The real tragedy is that this will happen again. Next week, next month, next year, it will happen again, and it will keep happening until the root cause of the conflict is tackled. And the root cause of that conflict, as my colleague has just said, is the fact that Israel is in military occupation of the Palestinian territories which were designated for a future state of Palestine. Now, from an Israeli point of view, this makes sense to continue that occupation. And in fact, not only does the Israeli government not set any policy to end that occupation, with every day and week that passes through the process of settlement building, of evictions and other measures, that occupation is entrenched to a point where, in the words of B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, there is now a one-state reality. And within that one-state reality, people's life chances and how people are treated are fundamentally different depending on whether you are Palestinian or whether you are an Israeli. And for more than 50 years, Israel has maintained this policy almost consequence-free. Yes, of course, there have been many UN resolutions and many people have wrung their hands and said it's not right. But actually, Israel has been able to maintain this military occupation pretty much unrestricted. Now, these petitions are before us today from people who are clearly concerned about the plight of the Palestinian people. And I ask you for a moment, particularly colleagues on the other side of this argument, to see it for a moment through their eyes. Because if we do not take action to try and persuade Israel to end the occupation and bring about a two-state reality, then what we are doing is breeding further despair amongst those Palestinian communities. We are galvanizing the extreme right wing in Israeli politics, and we are leading to a situation where groups like Hamas fill a political void which is left. So that is why we need to take some action. And I think there is a moment now with the new Israeli government and the new American government for this country to step up to the mark and do something. And if people to say that a boycott of Israel won't work, then the question the government has to answer is this: what sanctions should then be applied in order to try and make the Israeli government be consistent with international law? And finally, Chair, this surely must be the time to recognise Palestine. If we are sincere about a two-state solution, then you cannot say that on the one hand and refuse to recognise one of those states on the other.